Hello, everyone. Welcome to Pensive Politics with Mr. Watson. I am your host, Christian Watson. It has been a very long time since I've said the words pensive politics because our show is undergoing a rebranding, which I will talk about at the end of the show. But with me today, I have Adam Coleman. He is an author. He is the author of Black Victim to Black Victor, identifying the ideologies, behavioral patterns, and cultural norms that encourage a victimhood complex. Adam and I recently talked on a panel on Al Jazeera's Rightly. When I first discovered Adam when I was watching Gothics, and in my opinion, people like Gothics, people like Adam, are the exemplars of how one should think for themselves. I think that both Adam and Gothics here, as you will see in this interview, think in such a dynamic way that escapes the orthodoxy of how many individuals, especially of a particular political persuasion, think African Americans are supposed to think. So without further ado, Adam, thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
I'm always blessed to have another intellectual brother on the show and to have someone to share thoughts with. So it's really a blessing. So Adam, let's start with
Absolutely.
this. For those of people who may be unfamiliar, before I even get into the content of your book or your work, what got you interested in the struggle for Black free thought? What got you interested in the struggle against victimhood and collective thinking? What happened in your life? And tell people a little bit about you as you explain that as well.
Sure. I remember back to an early age where someone close to me told me that you shouldn't trust white people. And this was when I was single digits. I was pretty young. And I see and how that made sense because at the time I was living in predominantly white neighborhood. And so when you're telling me not to trust white people, yet white people are showing me nothing but kindness. And then I know of examples of Black people who weren't so kind to us. The idea that I'm supposed to base things purely off of skin color didn't make any sense to me, even at a young age. So I guess majority of my life, I've always kind of questioned that. And I've also been on the receiving end of not growing up in a particular way, especially when I didn't necessarily grow up in an urban area. So I grew up either in mixed areas or predominantly white areas. And so I kind of feel like it allowed for me to find whatever I liked. I went through different phases and trying different things. And I wasn't necessarily set in one particular way to act. But what I noticed was when I did come across some Black people, I was maligned, or I was, instead of being referred to as Adam, I was white Adam or something of that nature. And also what I noticed is that some white people also took up that way of thinking too. Like it was okay to refer to me as white Adam instead of just being Adam. And that, I think that for me is why free thought was always important to me. But admittingly, and in the book, I admit that as much as I was like, I just want to be myself, I want to express myself, whatever I feel like at that particular moment, that's not how I was politically for a long time. Politically, I kind of entered the space where, when you're new to something, you lean on someone who has experience or you believe has experience. And one of the first things someone told me to break down politics was Republicans are racist and Democrats are for Blacks. And so, my inconsistency led me to follow that rather than do what I've been doing majority of my life is kind of questioning that particular narrative. And so when that's your starting point, then it becomes difficult to kind of get out of that way of thinking. I was never really too tribalistic, but I definitely leaned left. I was never like a far left extremist or anything like that. But I was slanted to lean left. And in the book, I talk about certain situations that opened my eyes to maybe I don't know everything. Maybe I'm being lied to about certain things. One of them one of the things I write about is when I was traveling, I was in Madrid and I met a guy from Manchester, and he, he was just a great guy. We bonded over football, and we kept in contact. And this was right around Brexit, and he told me that he was for Brexit. And I'm thinking to myself, I thought, Brexit was for these far right people who are racist, who don't like foreigners. And he explained to me in a very simple way that made a lot of sense. He said the United States would never allow for outside governing body to tell it what to do. And I was like, that's a really good point. We wouldn't allow that. And he was actually the person who introduced me to Thomas Sowell. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and after discovering Thomas Sowell, it's kind of like how I've been like active in politics for over a decade. I've been alive for over 30 years at that point. How come I've never heard of this person? This guy's he's in his 90s now. How come I've never heard of this man? And it made me realize and question certain things. And that's when I started seeking more information politically than I did before. I think I did a lot of what I call like default Democrats do. They turn on the television, whatever the news says is what's going on, and you kind of just leave it alone. I did once in a while watch like documentaries. I was kind of a documentary nerd for a while, but even those, I started realizing that they're slanted too. And that kind of turned me off to documentaries. I would say these, especially the past couple of years, have been like a real awakening that I'm being lied to all over the place, and it's becoming harder and harder to decipher information. And I can't take things for face value anymore. I have to be skeptical just to live my life reasonably, rather than just blindly saying, okay, the right says this and I'm going to believe it now, or the left says this, I'm going to believe it. I just have to be skeptical on both sides.
Right. So your genesis, your intellectual genesis emerged from a sense of tribalism that was being imposed upon you simply because of how you acted amongst your peers. And then that went forth and created an aversion on your part to political tribalism as well. So there's
Right.
a sort of feeding loop into from the social to the political, and seems like a novel political observation to say that, but I think that many people forget the social ultimately does become the political, especially if you're in a system in which social pressures are able to be exerted upon the structure of government. In North Korea, of
Right.
course, the social was not necessarily the political, but you cannot have the kind of political system that you have in North Korea without an acquiescent, servile society. You can't have people who are regularly individualistic and independent in North Korea and then have that kind of government. It just wouldn't work. There'd be revolution immediately. So I think people need to understand that what you experience was a social phenomenon that translates neatly over into the political and probably explains quite a few of the problems we have today, or at least explains the form of them, even if it doesn't explain the content of them. And so on to this point of
Right.
tribalism, what do you think about the idea that Black Americans, as posited by certain academics like Dyson and so on and so forth, that Black Americans share a common destiny and a common history in America, given the atrocities of Jim Crow, and that common destiny, that common destiny, that common history in America should unite for collective political action and should therefore compel African Americans to hold social positions. They sort of tie these sort of ideological obligations to history, to chronology. And so what is your opinion of that argument from time? Because to me, it seems as if a lot of left-leaning academics who want to cast African Americans in that particular way do so on the basis of struggle, on the basis of suffering that African Americans may have faced in the past, without any reference or any investigation into the now. So what's your opinion
Right.
of that?
So one of the big words that comes to mind when you're talking about, especially someone like Michael Lake Dyson, he's incredibly intelligent, but a lot of people
Yep.
who are like him are very manipulative.
Mm.
A lot of that particular narrative is like a manipulation tactic It's the don't focus over here, focus on this. And especially when we talk about Black Americans, there is this constant talk of the past, as if the past never changes. The past is today. And there's always a reference to what is happening now is to the past. So like, for example, they talk about the police and slave catchers when they're not one and the same.
Nope, they're not.
You know, you know, so it's things like that. It's this constant referencing back to suffering that we, I would say the vast majority of Americans, unless you're incredibly old, did not experience. You know, so, and on top of that, I think we lose sight into, while we say America was a slave state, that's not true. Part of America was a slave state, and America at that time wasn't 50 states. You know, I in the book, I talk about the population growth even within the past 100 years. Man, I wish I could remember the numbers, but in the 1930s, I think we had less than 100 million. It was about less than 100 million in a population. Now we have over 330. And I brought up the population numbers to kind of talk about reparations, the idea that everyone today should pay for the sins of the past of the very few. And in reality, they are the aristocrats, or they are the elite that were running slave trade, not the poor white people who were living in the South. They had no money. They couldn't afford to house anyone and raise them and feed them. It was the people who had wealth, who had money. They were the very few. So to make the very few the elite, and the people, the type of people who end up in government, who create these laws to put Jim Crow into place after the Civil War, I mean, to punish everyone for the elite's actions sounds stupid to me. And then on top of that, you know, maybe from a statistical standpoint, most Americans had zero to do with slavery, or weren't even around, or ancestrally weren't even around for that time frame. And you know, how would that even work? You know, half of my ancestry is Trinidadian. You know, from my father's side, do I get half of the reparations payment? You know, you have people who are mixed race. My son is mixed race. Does he get part of it? You know, how would something like this work? And doesn't that defeat the point of the civil rights movement, to be seen as equal and be treated as equal? And that's kind of how I see things. I always reference the civil rights movement as the equalizer, right? America was based on certain values. The problem is that we weren't living up to those values. And the civil rights movement was the pivotal moment to equalize and get to what we were supposed to. Just by the eyes of the government, you can't legislate how people treat you, but you can damn sure get the government to treat you as an equal, right? You shouldn't have race-based, you know, government policy. That is the point. That was always the point. You know, I remember one of the phrases during the movement is, "I am a man." Right? It wasn't "I am a Black man." It was "I am a man." Right. And that's the point. The point is, I am a man just like you, who are someone who happens to be of a different race, is a man. And it was, that is the true equality. The equality that they're talking about is creating an equality to have some sort of future equality. But you know, that's like, you know, two wrongs don't make a right. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Interesting. Yeah, no, so now someone who is of the critical mindset, the critical race theory, and I say critical, I don't actually mean genuinely being critical, because that ideology is some of the most uncritical academic gobbledygook I've seen in my life. I'm only 21, so I might see some more, but so far that tops them all. Anyway, of most critical mindsets would take what you just said and say that you are not looking at the totality of the historical effects of slavery. So what these people think, and I'm going to still man their argument so you can knock it down, because I know you can. What these people think is that slavery didn't end with the Emancipation Proclamation. Slavery didn't end, well, it really didn't, but still, slavery didn't end during Reconstruction. That's when the slavery was like over. It didn't end then. It didn't end after sharecropping. It didn't end after, or, you know, injustice that was caused from slavery didn't end after Jim Crow. Everything from that point forward, from the point where African Americans were brought here in 1619, to the point where they became slaves, to the point where they were so-called free from slavery, then subjected to black codes, to the point where they became sharecroppers, to the point where they were mobbed and rioted, to the point where they were lynched, to the point where, okay, we got a little bit of freedom in 1960, but there's still a bunch of de facto segregation. Okay, to the point where there are still effects of housing prices. They will literally connect all of these disjointed things and place a single narrative, like a sort of clean sweep through time about them. So they would say to you, Adam, you mean well. Well, they may not say that, but the charitable ones may say that. You mean well, Adam, but you're not looking at the effects of slavery, because the effects of slavery, whereas the practice may have ended hundreds of years ago, the effects have lingered on through institutions, through laws, through practices, both social and governmental, and passing some legislation is not going to be able to reverse the hundreds of years of damage done by these mindsets and by these practices. What would you, Adam, say to that contention?
Well, I first, my whole thing is that, time isn't necessarily linear. And this idea that white people of the past benefited, let's say someone from the 1930s who was wealthy, we're assuming that their ancestors, the predecessors are still equally wealthy. And we think that wealth always transfers into the next generation. That's not true. You can have a rich father and a poor son. Like, that is very likely, and that's very possible. So this idea that because they benefited in the past, it means that they are forever rich in the future. I mean, we can look at lottery winners, we can look at athletes, we can look at all types of people who were rich temporarily and they lose the money. Like, these are real situations, that these are things that are possible. The other thing that I notice that critical race theorists always ignore is wealth of knowledge. They ignore that. They only care about
Yeah.
monetary value. And wealth of knowledge is how you create and still keep a hold of wealth. The reason why the ultra wealthy are able to pass on wealth is because they pass on knowledge to stay wealthy. They have the secret, they have the information on top of the economic means. I could give my son $1 million. He doesn't know how to make an additional $1 million. He doesn't have my knowledge unless I give him that knowledge. If I win money, I didn't actually earn that money. I just have the money, but it doesn't mean that I know how to pass on the knowledge. I can't teach my son to, go to the convenience store and buy a lottery ticket every Monday. That's not true economic knowledge. That's not true information. The reason I bring up information and knowledge is because I talk a lot in the book about the broken Black family. When the family is broken apart, and especially when the father is broken apart, someone who is traditionally seen as the breadwinner, someone who is supposed to be the the authority figure, he is a person who passes on the knowledge to their children, whether it be a boy or a girl, passes on critical information to help them sustain a wealthful living, whether it be just a personal wealthful living or a way of thinking about the world that can put them in a position of succeeding. When that family separates, that information starts to disappear.
Just real quick, do you think the mother has the same capacity to disperse knowledge upon their children?
Yes, but if we're being people who are examining history, historically, women weren't necessarily working to a degree as men were. So they're the ones who are actually earning the wealth economically. So that's why I mentioned that.
Yeah. No.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, you've seen a massive revolution in that regard. Women, especially from the 60s onward, especially post-sexual revolution, have taken up more active roles in households and things of that sort. Do you view that as a negative or as a sort of a sort of weakening of the structure of the Black family? Or do you think that there can exist a woman, as I think this, there can exist a woman who works and takes an active role, and a father who does the same, and they still do their respective duties? Because, like, in all honesty, there are some things
Mhm.
that a woman cannot teach her son that a father can absolutely teach his son. So even if she has a
Right.
more active role in the resources of the house and bringing those in, that doesn't mean she can play Superman or Superwoman. She can't do that. I mean,
No.
I myself was raised by a single mother, and she did everything in her power and did her absolute best. I love her to death. But there are just some things, and I've heard this several times told to me, Christian, there are some things that I don't understand. I think that's why, one of
Right.
the reasons why the father is absolutely indispensable to a healthy, rounded existence. What do you think? A good father, a good father, a
I
good father,
agree.
good father.
A good father.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is always with the presumption that this is a relatively well-rounded father, right? There is no perfect father.
Right.
I'm a father. I'm flawed, and I
Yeah.
talk about in the book. I made mistakes, but my intentions were good, and I was always trying to improve. And I think that's what most men are like, and most fathers are like, um, when they're given the opportunity. The problem is that we have a culture of removing that opportunity, disparaging men, um, not even working with men. And we're telling people um, to behave in a way that's not necessarily natural. So to kind of go back to what you were saying as far as women working, I have zero problem with women working. My fiance, she likes working, right? But she'll be the first person to admit she likes working to a degree. She would love to have a family. She would love to have children. She would love to nurture. She's the most nurturing person in the world. I don't think my fiance is an outlier. I think a lot of women feel that way, but I think when you actually talk to them, some of them feel pressured into entering the job market or staying within the job market. Matter of fact, it's funny that we bring this up. In one of the groups that I'm in, there was a woman who talked about her experience where she left her career as a teacher, which she enjoyed doing, but she has a far higher satisfaction staying home and raising her children. But she also talked about the people who were, downplaying her move and thinking that she was stupid or thinking that she's giving into the patriarchy by doing so. But she
So,
felt a personal fulfillment by doing this,
yeah.
you know, and and so I'm all about, what the original idea of feminism was supposed to be, giving women the choice, right? But not forcing women to take a position.
Right.
If you want to stay
Yes.
home and take care of your children, then stay home and take care of your children. If you want to, be submissive to your husband and let him lead the household so you can have a happy existence, then that's your prerogative. You know, if you want a traditional role, there is nothing wrong with that. But when we chastise women, when we tell women that in order for you to have some sort of power in this world, you have to act like a man, while at the same time telling you that the male nature is inherently wrong.
Right.
It's a very confusing message. And one of the things I start noticing is the women who fall into these traps later in life are are not very happy.
Yeah.
They are sometimes single with no children, and they want children, but it's later in life and they've given up
Yeah.
and they've chased a career. There's women who have been disparaging of men, so they don't take a relationship with a man seriously. They're not willing to sacrifice to stay within a relationship. They may have children, but they're single mothers, and so here they are by themselves to bear all the burden of being a financial provider and the nurturer and the disciplinarian, all to be, like you said, the superwoman, which in a lot of ways, no matter how hard they try, they will fail to some degree because, especially if they have boys, they can't teach a boy how to be a man.
And vice versa with a
I
father.
think that's something that
Vice versa with a father as
exactly,
well.
exactly,
Yeah. The father can't
right.
really, when his
And
daughter's going through some things, he can't really relate to all that. Yeah.
right, right.
Right.
And I talk about that a lot in the book. I talk about the role of the father is different depending on the sex of the child, whether it be a boy or a girl. But his role is important. missing that role manifests in different ways for both children. So, you know, the psychological idea is that, you know, the most important parental figure to a child is the same sex parent,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's also part of the basis of what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Now, you said a lot of good thoughts there, and I just want to comment on a few. You mentioned feminism. Let's just be
Yeah,
honest with you. Modern day feminism is not feminism, it's misandry. It is complete and utter
right.
rank misandry. It is absolute hatred, vitriolic reactions towards men simply because of their existence. And this kind of underlies
Mm-hmm.
the problem with activists, well, I shouldn't say activists, with second and third wave feminism. This kind of underlies the problem with that entire branch, the Julia Butlers, all these people, underlies the problem. They're taking a natural quality, femininity, and they are
Mm-hmm.
twisting it and manipulating it under the auspices of social definitions. This is how you confuse people. Because
Right.
femininity is something that is found in nature, as is masculinity. Those these things have correspondence to reality, and they absolutely have meanings, concrete definitions built into their existence that we can observe empirically through the animal kingdom and through the course of human history. And so these things are already ingrained, they're already defined, they're already set out, they're already intelligible. But they want to take that,
Mm-hmm.
ignore all of that, and say, no, 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 these things are all made by society, even though that's absolutely prima facie false. And so let's rewrite the definition of what being a man means, what being a woman means, and let's just put our own little label on it. That's a big problem. I think
Mm-hmm.
Bogan would call this Gnosticism. It's the idea that you can change the world simply because to make it good or because you have good intent. But the fact is, and I'm sure you agree with this, reality is an objective and resolute force that does not cater to the subjective
Right.
whims of its residents. It simply does not. So the first problem of feminism, in my opinion,
Right.
at least second and third wave, is that it is an absolutely both reductionist and subjectivist ideology of how we apprehend the natural and intelligible conditions of masculinity and femininity. They are already defined and laid out. We can simply observe them and deduce what those definitions are. We don't need to have a gender theorist tell us what a woman is supposed to do. We don't need to have a gender theorist tell us that male rage or male masculinity or toxicity or whatever, that's the cause of all our problems. Because oftentimes, when people offer very simple answers to very complex natural phenomenon, they tend to be wrong. They tend to be
Yeah.
wrong by virtue of their simplicity. So those
Right.
are my thoughts. What do you think about all that?
No, I completely agree with you, and I think that this narrative, in some ways, as far as like feminism, just in general, I think feminism has been slowly creeping into the culture. Um, you know, for I would say decades. I remember in the '90s, the politically correct movement, in some ways, was also in the right because they were trying to censor speech. Um, but some people on the left were also trying to do that too. There were, you know, I remember like decency laws and things like that.
Obscenity
So there
laws, yeah.
was a movement of, yeah, that's what, yeah, obscenity laws. Um, so there was this political correctness movement, but I remember also there was a growing feminist movement as well. I'm reminded of a movie. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, called PCU. Have you ever seen it?
Never seen it. Who's in it?
So Jeremy Pivens is in it. He's the
Okay.
main actor in it. But if you go and watch it today, and just remember, this is in the 1990s. This is when like David Spade was a young guy. You
Mm-hmm.
know, that's how long ago it was. When you're watching, you're like, oh my God, the U.S. campus is exactly like how it is today. Literally, the joke about the movie was that their campus had turned into a politically correct campus, where there were the what they called the womanists, who were just the classic feminists who hated men just because. There were the every week they pick a different cause, hippies, you know, like you know, they want to save the rainforest one week, then they want to stop global warming the next week, then they're vegans the next week. So they had those group of people. They had the black nationalists, you know,
Mm-mm-mm.
the white man is this. They had that group of people. So like the movie focuses on how separated the college was based off of all this political correctness, and it was absolutely not fun. But there was like a small group of people who just did not care about any of it, and everybody hated them because they weren't complying. And ultimately, in the movie, they all kind of come together in their own weird way. But I think about that movie because that was in the 1990s, and feminism, they were talking about it. They were joking about it in some ways. And funny enough, in Hollywood, they're joking about it in this movie, but it's existed for a while. This demoralization of men, and now it's almost like popular culture. Um, the other thing when you were speaking, I don't know if you're aware of this, but there is a strong femininity movement with online on YouTube. You know, where women are watching videos of influencers who are teaching them how to be feminine. And I personally know women who are actually watching this, and
Wow.
and that's for a particular reason. You know, there
Yikes.
are women who don't know how to act feminine, who aren't sure if they're acting too masculine because of all this, the social triggers of, you know, don't let a man do this, you need to take this on, you need to be strong, all these
Yeah.
different things. And it's really helping women. um, Matter of fact, I have a friend who lives in the UK who started watching these videos, and she was talking about her experience the other day going to, you know, the post office, and how she dressed in a feminine way and she was acting in a feminine way and she was smiling, and the reaction of the guys who were there, you know, just the average guy who was there, was far different than it used to be because of how she was presenting herself, and it was way more welcoming than it was before. And she's starting to understand how she projects herself as far as being a feminine woman has a lot of power and a lot of strength, and it's not a weakness. You know, you can get a lot by being very feminine from you know, especially from other guys. You can get a well reception from acting
Mhm.
feminine. And I think a lot of women have downgraded femininity like it's some you know, some weakness. You know, the idea of staying home and taking care of your children and not going out and being part of the workforce, you know, there is strength within the family. There's real
Sure.
true importance within the
Sure.
family. And I think that everybody has lost sight of that.
Now, let's just be clear. I'm not sure if you believe this, and it's fine if you do. This is a space for all kind of ideas.
Mhm.
But for me,
Yeah.
I would find it absurd to tell a woman, any woman, that because of what natural quality you possess, you need to be bound to a kitchen. You need to be bound to taking care of a kitchen. You need to be bound to a position of nurturing. And I will go out there and I will be aggressive and I'll get the money and I'll bring home the bread. I find that absolutely absurd because that very simple explanation of a woman's duties doesn't really correspond to the
Mhm.
vast complexity of a reality of a woman's duties, because a woman is not simply a woman. A woman is an individual as well. And you can't really
Right.
understand who someone is solely through their sex. So the libertarian
Right.
in me says, okay, wait, hold on. I understand that if people want to take up traditional gender roles in a voluntary way, good, that's fine. But they
Right.
shouldn't be obligated or even expected to because their physiology is a certain way. People should see, okay, does this fit well with where I want to go in my life? Do I want to go travel the world
Right.
in my 20s after college, go to Spain, go to France, date around, before I settle down? Okay, I mean that would be kind of contrary to the a traditional or a certain kind of traditional reading of a woman's duty. Or do I want to just go settle down after college,
Mhm.
get married? Okay, that works as well. For me, it's not about obligation or expectation. It's about understanding what's available to you and making an informed decision on the basis of what feels best for you in your own life. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. And just to be clear, what I'm saying is that I think a lot of women are getting sold bad goods. You know,
Yeah.
they're getting sold bad information. I think I have this theory, and it's not like any type of scientific theory, but just from personal experience. I think just about every woman wants to get married, theoretically. Whether every woman is a wife is a different story, but the idea that they want to get married is
Oh man.
pretty common. Um, so, you know, if the objective and the goal is to get married, that is a big step. How you go about it is up to you if that's what you want to do. But what is being told to women is that you're equating attraction for a man is, and that's how a man is attracted to you, when most men don't care how much a woman makes. He doesn't care what degrees she has. He doesn't care all of these different things. It's nice that you're relatively intelligent, but that's not what attracts men, in the natural sense. Men are attracted by different things and women are attracted by different things. But we are told that not only there's equality in the absolute, but it's equality in how we see each other. Equality that, that I am to, I behave in a particular way and you should behave in the same exact way. It doesn't matter what genitalia you have or how many hormones or testosterone or anything like that. We're just all the same and there's no difference between us. And I think women are falling for that lie to think that we are exactly the same. We want the exact same things, regardless of sex, that, and also I think a lot of women are being told to deny what feels more natural.
Mm-hmm.
And they're being told to go in a particular direction. Don't completely rely on a man, don't, because that is a weakness. And so they're going in they're basically moving in a way that puts men optional, even though they want a life with a man. It's counterproductive. Most women don't want to die alone, yet they're moving in a way that increases their chances of dying alone. So, I talk about the family and how could you expect the Black family to stay together when a lot of women within the Black community don't see men as a necessity, they see them as optioning, as an option, basically. So why would they sacrifice their, power? Why would they sacrifice, anything within a particular relationship to keep someone that is optional? Why would you do that? But in order to have an actual relationship, a marriage that's successful, you have to see someone as a necessity. You have to respect that person. You have to want them to be there, and you have to be willing to sacrifice some of your voice in order to do so. Because on the flip side, men have to sacrifice as well. But that is something that you have to willfully do in order to have a successful union. And I think there is a crisis in this country of not being willing to sacrifice. There is there's like there's a religion crisis that's also going on. And part of religion that I'm starting to realize is that religion is about sacrificing yourself for a greater good or a greater God or a greater being, but something greater than yourself. And, I'm just looking at people who aren't willing to sacrifice in a variety of different ways. I mean, we can take this conversation a bunch of different ways, but when it comes to relationships, you have to be willing to sacrifice, but you're willing to sacrifice for something that is ultimately beneficial to you and for someone that you care about and that you love. But you have to find that person to be a necessity in your life. And without that feeling of necessity, if you think that if he doesn't do what I want him to do, divorce is an option, then that's what will happen. But if you see that person as a necessity, you'll try as hard as possible to keep that person around. And I think that, I think you have to be willing to do that.
I'm gonna guess you don't like the Beyonce principle then.
Well, even Beyonce doesn't live by those principles.
No, I mean, no, she doesn't. But that song, Irreplaceable, to the left,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
That's the principle. A lot of people, it's a good song, by the way. But that's the principle that a lot of people abide by. And I know for a lot of conservatives, it's tragic to see the rise in divorces and the burgeoning nature of the divorce lawyer industry. And for me personally, it's sad because of the carnage and the struggle that is reflected by those numbers, by the rise in divorce lawyers. I mean, it's a lot of divorces are very bitter and nasty, and it's horrible to see another human being go through that emotional trauma of that. But having said that, I'm not sure that a defining aspect of a relationship should be about seeing someone else as necessary to your own existence, even if it's just in that moment. I'm not sure about that, because I think ultimately, this is just my opinion, at the end of the day, you are the person who experiences your life. You're the only person who will ever see things through your eyes, speak through your mouth. This does not mean you should be the only
Right.
person you're supposed to ever walk with. No, of course, welcome many people in this world. But for me, at a very base level, ignoring all social mores, ignoring relationships, what you need at the very base level to even begin to understand what being satisfied as a human being is, you need to have your good sense and your rationality, and bound up in those two things, as one of my favorite theorists from the Dutch natural law school, natural law school, Emerdi Vital would say, a rational self-love. You have to value yourself on a not just a physical level. I love who I am. No, on a metaphysical level. Value the meaning of your very being. Value the meaning of who you are in relation to the world, in relation to everything. That is what I think you need. That's the only really necessity, I think, in anything in life. That's the only necessity. Now, there are a bunch of other things that are pretty damn important. There are a bunch of other things that you probably would be happier with. You probably would be happier with a mate to go through life with. Probably would be happier. So there are plenty of other things that make us feel satisfied, make us feel great as human beings. But I think that man is not conceived solely. Man is conceived to a social context, but man himself is more than simply a social being. We are social beings, but that's not all we are. We're much more than that. And beneath us being a social animal, beneath that is one's appreciation for themselves. That's, in my opinion, where all relationships begin. So all I'm saying is, I'm not sure if you need to see someone else as necessary for you. I think, however, and maybe we're just playing with words here, I think you can see someone else as incredibly important, to your life and to your happiness, without putting all of your eggs in that basket. Because the nature of human relationships is fragility and flux. And if that basket were to break, that person were to leave, or that person were to want to leave, or that person were to do something bad to you, you would have to value your own self first and understand your own worth, without, of course, making a relationship all about you. Relationships are not all about one person. They are about two people. They are about the union, not just you. When you are single, you are whole, as the great Bishop T.D. Jakes once said. If you are single, you are whole. You are a single unit. But when you are in a relationship, you are divided. You're divided between interests, between energy. Your energy is divided. Everything about you is divided. So I accept that, and that's very important. But I think in the process of coming back from the division, if that ever does happen, people still have to have an understanding of the importance of themselves. That was a lot there, but what do you think about that?
No. And so when I say necessity, this is with the assumption that you are a secure human being, right? I don't advocate for a man who feels empty to try and fill himself with women.
Good. That was my
or
worry.
a marriage or anything like that.
That was my worry.
Not at all. This is all with the presumption that we are two secure human beings. So I'll use my personal situation, myself as a man and my fiance. We are not two insecure people who are looking to gravitate towards each other. That's just that's chaos waiting to happen. When I say necessity, what I mean is it's a necessity for you to want to keep that person in your life, because like you said, when you're single, you're a whole. When you're in a union, you're divided. So that means that you have to make some sacrifices. But in order to make a sacrifice with anything in life, you have to find it to be necessary to make a sacrifice, and you have to,
that makes sense.
That's basically what I mean when it comes to that. You have to be willing to sacrifice for someone that you care about. But another key thing when it comes to relationships, and I'm someone who's dated a lot and been on the dating scene for many years, and I've been in and out of relationships that were, somewhat successful, some more so than others. But one thing that becomes like a very common thing, especially when dating other women, obviously I'm not dating men, but I'm dating women. And one thing that's common that they bring up is that um, they're afraid to get hurt, right? Or they're afraid of something to happen. They have a fear of something going on, and they're afraid to be vulnerable. And the nature of having a successful relationship is that you have to risk being vulnerable, and you have to risk the possibility that this will fail. It's like any other venture. And when it comes to marriage, it's a legal venture too. I'm about to get married, so I have to be willing to risk that this is going to
Right.
fail in order for it to succeed. So it's that risk part of it that I think a lot of people are risk adverse, and they are trying to, mitigate whether or not this will work out, and things of that nature. So, those are really, really big concepts: sacrifice, um, being risk averse, vulnerability. These are all very big things. And we are telling people to avoid those things for self preservation. But if your goal is to be in union with someone, then these things are necessities, which is why it's even more so important to pick correctly, and not just pick at a whim, get married, then get divorced, pick someone, get married, get divorced. That just leads to disaster and trauma and all this nonsense, broken families. Um,
Right. No,
that's why it's really important.
irrational self-preservation is no self-preservation at all. It is self-destruction. So
Right,
I think people really don't get that part.
right.
Anyway, no, I think that's very good stuff. So, we're winding down to the end of our interview here. Adam Messi, this has been a brilliant conversation.
Yeah.
I am happy that you decided to come on the Pensive Politics podcast. I have not gotten to talk about feminism quite yet with
Okay.
anyone. So you were the first person on the podcast to talk about feminism, and so that's always awesome. That's always awesome. There are some other feminist, like some individualist feminists that I kind of want to talk to, like Christina Hoff Sommers. I want to see how they fit into that entire mold, because to me, I don't know, it seems like a little bit of an oxymoron to me. But anyway, I in just a fascinating conversation. Before we wrap up, though, I want to talk about one or two more things. Um,
Sure.
you mentioned black nationalists in that movie, and I think that black nationalism in all of its forms, whether it's black nationalism in the form of simply being a black supremacist, a lukewarm one at best, or black nationalism in the form of being a card-carrying member of Louis Farrakhan's congregation and an adherent
Mhm.
to the precepts of the Nation of Islam, or black nationalism in the form of being an adherent and an apologist for the continent of Africa and all of the culture in Africa, also known as Pan-Africanism. I think
Mhm.
every single head, I envision black nationalism or black supremacy as a hydra that has multiple heads, and some of them are longer than others, some of them are more vicious than others, and they have different sets of teeth, and they spit out different things. One may spit out ice, one may spit out fire, one may just be able to calcify and freeze you with its stare. And I do it like this because I think that it's important to contextualize and hierarchize, that's not a word, rate your threats, because if you don't do that, you begin thinking that all of them are exactly the same. And that's one of the most biggest misunderstandings in American politics today. People say Republicans and Democrats are the same. No, they are not. They have the same form, but everything about them is vastly different. Oh, well, they're buddies at the end of the day.
Mhm.
No, 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 no. That's not a consequence of them. That's a consequence of the system that they're forced to work in. Trust me, I think most Republicans would love to steamroll Democrats, and vice versa. Democrats would love to steamroll Republicans if it meant getting their agenda passed. But the nature of a collaborative context is that you cannot do that. If we had a one party state, I promise you, things would be very different. But anyway, going back to that. So, in this sort of hydra of black supremacy, there are a few individuals, and I will name names, that concern me the
Mhm.
most. And you let me know if you know about these individuals and you have any thoughts about them. Let's go with the first one. Do you know who Tariq Nasheed is?
I knew you were going to say that. Yes.
Okay, what is your opinion of his brand of black supremacism?
One thing that's interesting about Tariq Nasheed is that I don't know if you know this, but he used to be one in the pickup game. Pickup artist. Did you know about that?
He was a pickup artist.
Yeah, I think he
Really?
even wrote a book. But he used to teach men how to pick up women, right?
Oh wow.
And when you learn about those guys who are strictly about picking up, these aren't relationship guys or anything like that. These are pickup artists. What that is, you're manipulating people to sleep with you. Essentially, you're manipulating someone to find you attractive even if you're not attractive, right? You're trying to convince them. It's the car salesman effect. You're trying to sell a woman yourself. He just found an even better gig. That's how I see him. I had a conversation with a guy who you know who's more libertarian minded and stuff like that. We were just having a free flowing conversation, and he was like, I watch all types of content. He's like, who I really like watching? Tariq Nasheed. And I started laughing. And he's a white guy. And I'm like, you watch Tariq Nasheed? He was like, yeah, I think he's hilarious because everything always comes out to white supremacy. It's like, no matter what it is. And I was like, yeah, because that's the scam. The scam is everything centers around white supremacy. So that is always the fault of everything. Any problem you see is white supremacy. And when you have, like you said, a simple solution, to me, that sounds like lies and manipulation. And so if you always have a simple solution, then you can answer any question, you can deflect any criticisms, you can do whatever you want because you always have the solution, you always have the answer. So to me, I don't even necessarily believe that he believes what he is saying. He makes a living basically calling everything white supremacy. He gets known for being bombastic, and so it's a great scheme. I question a lot of the people the race baiters of the world, if they actually believe what they say.
Mhm.
And I talk about the Al Sharptons of the world. Does he actually believe what he is saying? And by his actions and the amount of money he makes, I mean, he has no incentive to think otherwise. So he makes a lot of money, and I actually talk about his tax records. You can and in case anyone's watching this, for any nonprofit, was it 501c3, you can look up their, I believe it's the 990 tax form. You can go online and pull it up in minutes. You can look and see how much they pay each other. And in 2019, he paid himself well over $1 million based off of donations. So and you can see that he doesn't really have anybody else in his payroll except for his lawyer and I think one other guy who paid a little bit of money. And then you can see where the money goes to a degree. It's somewhat itemized. And he spent like an exorbitant amount of money on phones, travel expenses, all these different things. But you wonder, like, all right, but where is this? Is a nonprofit to help Black people to some degree. Where is this money going? And so that even more so kind of highlights that this is all a scheme. At least you can talk about the NAACP. You can point out some of the programs that they do. Um, NAN, Al Sharpton's organization. I mean, it's a slush fund, in my opinion. Um,
Interesting.
and he has a history, and I there's articles you can look it up, and I even feature it in the book, where I think I featured it in the book. I can't remember if I took it out or not, but there's articles you can find it. Washington Post talks about it, where he's basically funding his family and funding this and funding that all through his nonprofit. So it's tax-free money that he's just utilizing to throw around whichever way. And last time I checked, I could be wrong, but I haven't seen an Al Sharpton College Fund. I haven't seen an Al Sharpton Community Center. I haven't seen anything under his name or his organization that actually does anything beneficial other than paying for caskets of the so-called martyrs that we have in this country. So Other than that, I have no idea what he actually does with that money other than use it for himself. So,
Right.
I take offense to these men who profit off the pain of Black people while claiming at the same time that they're there to help people and that the true enemy are the people who look different than you. Meanwhile, they're taking your money, doing nothing with it, and you get no benefit from it. So, who's the real crook?
Right. Interesting. So now let me ask you another question. You probably
Yeah.
know who I'm going to mention too. This famous Pan-Africanist man. Um, you already know him, I mentioned.
I already know.
Um, do you think the the most requested speaker in all industries of the world, as he calls himself, Dr. Umar Johnson, is also of the same scheming variety of Tariq Nasheed and Al Sharpton? Or is this man actually onto something, hitting an actual nerve, believing he's protecting Black folks, but the effects are, not obviously protecting Black folks? What do you think?
I think he's full of it. He's been
Oh my
asking for
gosh.
money. This man has been talking about building a school for I don't know how long, since he popped up on the scene. I need money to build this school. He goes on Twitter. Anytime something controversial happens, he talks about maybe you can give us money for this school, right? You know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of when the old joke about the church always has a roof fund. How come that roof has never been fixed? Oh, it's getting fixed. We just need to contribute more money to the roof fund. It's that same idea. Meanwhile, you have all different types of celebrities, non-celebrities, who are able to get some investors together and start a charter school. There are all different types of people who have less of a presence than himself, and they're able to achieve what he is claiming to wanting to achieve. Yet every time I see a video with this guy, he is on the road somewhere, he's in a hotel room somewhere, and he's begging for more money. So, part of me questions, not part of me, a lot of me questions, what is he actually doing? And to me, it just sounds like con man work. It's the traveling salesman. Uh, you know, so that's basically my opinion when it comes to Umar Johnson. I don't believe a word he says. And to be honest with you, people who beg for money as frequently as they do with no results, that's kind of why I don't give money to a lot of charities. Especially when you see charity after charity and you're like, okay, but where are the results? And you start learning about how charities move their money. That was it the Red Cross? They spend, was it like 5 or 10% of the money to actually go towards what they say it goes towards? The rest of it goes to administration and salaries and buildings. And you're like, but it's not actually going towards helping people. So why am I giving my money to something that's inefficient? We already have a government.
Interesting. That is a brilliant, brilliant point. Oh yeah, well, and in that case, you don't give them; they just take it by force.
Right.
Um, Adam, you are brilliant, and everyone should go buy your book. It
Thank you.
is. Please say it again. It is Black Victim to Black Victor, right?
Correct.
Everyone should go buy that book on Amazon today. I think that we need to have more dialogue around these issues, and there needs to be, and there is actually a renaissance of African American thought that is strictly individualist and prides who we are as human beings and not who we appear to be as sort of socially defined, socially categorized creatures who are based off of this single thing here, which is how many people, including the left, including critical race theorists, view Black people. So thank you for having
Correct.
a more complex and a more holistic understanding of African American and just in general, humanity in general. It's very helpful. It's very inspiring, and I hope that you will come back on the show one day.
Thank you. Absolutely.
All right, and everyone, you please stay pensive. Bye.